The desert village was quiet that evening, the twin moons hanging low in the sky, painting everything in silver and pale blue. David sat outside his small wooden hut, sharpening the blade of a farming tool. He had been living among the alien tribe for months now, ever since fate had pushed him into their world. They accepted him reluctantly, some still calling him the weak outsider, but no one could deny that he had saved their leader's life during the last raid. That was the only reason he was allowed to stay. He thought of the long day's work, his body tired but calm, when the old elder walked slowly toward him, leaning on a crooked staff carved with strange patterns. The elder's dark eyes glowed faintly under the moonlight, filled with something that looked like warning. "You must be careful," the elder said in a deep, broken voice. David looked up, confused. The elder leaned closer. "She is entering the season. Kaylee. You know her." The name made David pause. Kaylee was the young alien woman he had seen many times in the market, strong and proud, always with sharp words for him. Her skin carried faint, glowing marks like fire beneath the surface, and her eyes burned with defiance whenever she looked at him. He nodded slowly, unsure why the elder spoke of her now. The elder tapped his staff hard against the ground. "Do you hear me, human? She is in heat. When it comes, the mind is lost. Instinct takes control. You must stay away. If she comes near, if she knocks, if she calls, do not answer, and always lock your door." His voice dropped to a whisper. "If you forget, it will be too late." David frowned. To him, Kaylee had always seemed untouchable, someone far above his reach, someone who saw him as less. He wanted to laugh at the thought of her even looking at him in such a way. "I understand," he said politely, though his tone carried doubt. The elder's gaze hardened, as if seeing his disbelief. "This is no game. Many have died because of such seasons. She is dangerous now, not because she chooses, but because she cannot choose. Remember my words." With that, the elder turned and shuffled into the shadows, leaving David with an uneasy weight in his chest. The night stretched on, and David finished his work, trying to push the warning from his mind. He went inside his hut, lighting a single lantern that filled the room with a warm glow. The air smelled of wood and earth, comforting and familiar. He barred the small window as he always did, and set his farming tool by the wall. For a moment, he stared at the rough wooden door. His hand hovered over the lock, then slowly he slid the metal bolt into place. He chuckled to himself, shaking his head. "As if she would ever come here," he muttered under his breath. The thought was foolish. Kaylee hated him, or at least she always acted like she did. There was no reason to fear her, no reason to imagine she would appear at his door in the middle of the night. He lay down on his bed, staring at the ceiling. The elder's words replayed in his head, haunting him like an echo. "If you forget, it will be too late." David closed his eyes, promising himself he would never forget. He drifted into sleep, the quiet sounds of the village carrying through the air, the distant murmur of guards, the call of night creatures, the crackle of fires slowly dying. Hours passed, the moons moving across the sky. At some point, David turned in his sleep, restless, the air heavy and strange. He didn't notice when the lantern flickered and died, leaving the room in darkness. Somewhere outside, soft footsteps pressed against the dirt. Slow, careful. The sound of breathing, faint but rapid, carried on the wind. The door stood tall and silent, the metal bolt firm in its place. Then a cloud passed over the moons, plunging everything in deeper shadow. A hand, slim, trembling, with faint glowing lines under the skin, touched the door. Fingertips traced the wood. Nails scraped gently as if fighting the urge to claw. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the hand slipped away. Inside, David turned again in his sleep. His arm brushed the wall, his eyes opened slightly, half dreaming. He sat up, heart beating strangely fast. The hut felt too quiet, too still. He rubbed his face, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. His eyes drifted to the door. He frowned. In his tiredness earlier, had he locked it? His chest tightened. He rose from his bed, bare feet pressing against the cold floor, and walked toward the door. His hand reached for the bolt. But in the dim light of the moon seeping through the cracks, he saw it. He had forgotten. The lock hung open, unused. Before he could move, the door gave a soft creak. A rush of cold night air slipped into the room, carrying with it a strange scent, sharp and wild. David froze, his heart hammering. In the silence, he heard it, the sound of breathing, not his own. He looked up slowly. There in the doorway stood a figure, Kaylee. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark, fixed on him. Her chest rose and fell fast, as if every breath burned. She didn't speak, didn't move, only watched him with an intensity that made the air thick and heavy. For the first time, David felt the truth of the elder's words. He had forgotten to lock the door, and now she was inside. The night was silent except for the faint creak of wood under her weight as Kaylee stepped inside. The door closed behind her with the softest thud, but to David it sounded like thunder. He stood frozen, half awake, half terrified, staring at her. Moonlight slipped through the cracks in the wall and touched her face, making the glowing lines under her skin shine brighter. Her breath came in sharp bursts, too fast, like someone struggling against fire, burning from the inside. She didn't blink, her eyes locked on him as if she saw nothing else in the world. David's throat felt dry. He wanted to speak, to demand why she was here, but the words stuck. He could only watch as she moved one step closer. Her movements were slow, heavy, as though she was dragging her own body against an unseen weight. The air changed around her, thicker, warmer. David could feel the heat rolling off her like waves from a furnace. She looked wild, but there was something broken in her expression too, something that frightened him more than anger ever could. She stopped near his bed. For a long moment, she stood there in silence, chest rising fast, her hands shaking slightly at her sides. Her lips parted, but no words came out. David finally found his voice. "Kaylee," he whispered, his tone low, unsure. His own heart hammered so hard he thought she might hear it. She tilted her head, as if hearing her name made her waver, and for a brief second her expression softened. But then her eyes burned again, sharp with need, and she leaned closer. Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse and trembling. "Why didn't you lock it?" The question hit him harder than a shout. He froze, not knowing how to answer. It wasn't just anger in her voice. There was desperation, almost like she had begged him to save her from herself, but he had failed. Her body shook, as though she was fighting chains inside her own mind. He could see sweat shining on her skin, her breathing shallow and quick. David took a careful step back, but the bed blocked him. He raised his hands slowly. "You need help," he said, his voice steadying, though his chest was tight. "You're not well." But Keely only shook her head, her long hair falling into her glowing eyes. She pressed a hand against her own chest, clawing at her clothes as if the heat inside was unbearable. Her knees buckled, and before David could move, she fell forward. He caught her by instinct, her weight collapsing into his arms. The shock nearly threw him off balance, not because she was heavy, but because her body was burning hot, hotter than fever. His skin stung where she touched him, yet she trembled like someone freezing. Her hands clutched at his shirt, pulling weakly, her sharp nails digging into the fabric. David held her carefully, lowering her to the bed. She curled on her side, shaking, her body a storm of heat and weakness. "Kaylee?" He tried again, his voice softer now. He didn't know what to do. He had heard about animal fevers before, but this was no ordinary sickness. The elder's words rang in his mind. She would lose control. She would not think, only act. And yet lying there, she didn't look dangerous. She looked broken, caught between strength and helplessness. Her breathing hitched as she pressed her face into the blanket, muffling a sound that was almost a sob. David knelt beside her, his hand hovering over her arm, unsure if touching her was safe. She shifted suddenly, clutching his wrist with startling strength, her glowing eyes locking on him. "Don't leave me." The words cracked like dry wood, rough, desperate. He felt the heat in her grip, too strong for someone so weak. "I'm not leaving," he said quickly, though his own body screamed with confusion. Her strength could crush him if she lost full control. Yet he stayed. He had seen fear in battle, had faced danger from beasts, but nothing was like this. Nothing was like being held by someone who was both powerful and broken in the same breath. Kaylee's grip loosened as if she believed him. Her eyes fluttered closed for a moment, her breathing evening out only slightly. He watched her chest rise and fall, saw the glowing patterns on her skin brighten and fade like embers in a dying fire. For a long moment, he simply listened to the sound of her breathing, the soft hiss of air through her lips, and the pounding of his own heart. The night stretched on. Outside, the wind stirred the dirt, carrying faint voices of guards changing shifts, but inside the hut there was only silence and heat. David tried to think of what would happen if someone found her here. The tribe would kill him for dishonor, or worse, they would take her away and punish her. The thought tightened his chest. Suddenly, Kaylee stirred again. Her eyes opened, glowing faintly in the dim light, and she whispered something in her own language. He couldn't understand, but her tone was pleading, fragile. She tugged his hand weakly, pulling it closer to her chest, pressing it against her skin as if searching for relief. David froze, caught between instinct and reason, his mind racing. He could feel her heartbeat, wild and uneven, hammering beneath his palm. For the first time, he realized she wasn't just a warrior or a proud daughter of her people. She was something else now. Something vulnerable. Something human in a way he hadn't imagined. Her eyes searched his face, full of a question she couldn't ask, and then her strength faded again. She slumped, her body heavy, her breathing shallow. David sat there, holding her hand, staring at the door he had forgotten to lock. The elder's warning rang in his ears louder than ever. But even as fear pressed on him, he couldn't bring himself to push her away. She had come to him, and whether it was madness or fate, she was here now, in his arms, burning and trembling, whispering words she could not stop. The night was far from over, and he knew this was only the beginning. David sat on the edge of the bed, his hands still trapped in Kaylee's grip. Her skin burned like fire, yet she trembled as though ice wrapped around her bones. He could hear every quick breath she took, uneven and sharp, and it twisted something inside him. He didn't know how long he had been sitting there, minutes, maybe hours, but the weight of the elder's warning pressed heavier with every heartbeat. She was not herself. She could not control this. And if the others found out she had come to him, both of them would pay the price. Her nails dug deeper into his wrist as her glowing eyes fluttered open again. She stared at him, not like the proud warrior who had always looked down on him in the village, but like someone begging for life. Her lips trembled, words forming without strength. "Help me." The sound was faint, cracked, almost lost in the silence. David swallowed hard. He had treated wounds before. Wrath carried injured men out of battles. But this was different. This was not blood or broken bone. This was something he could not understand. He wanted to help, yet every part of his mind screamed that staying close to her was dangerous. Her people would kill him if they saw this. Still, he looked at her and knew he could not leave her like this. Suddenly, a sound outside broke the moment. Heavy boots pressed against the dirt. Voices carried through the thin walls. Guards. They were close. David's chest tightened. He glanced at the door. If they found her here, there would be no excuses. His eyes darted back to Kaylee. She lay curled on the bed, her glowing patterns pulsing like wild embers, her body too weak to move quickly. She couldn't even stand. She needed him to act. He grabbed her shoulders gently. "Kaylee," he whispered urgently, "you have to hide. They're coming." She groaned, her head shaking weakly as if refusing. Her eyes begged him not to let go, not to move her. But the footsteps grew louder, shadows passing across the cracks of the hut. He had no choice. With one strong pull, he dragged her off the bed. She was heavier than he expected, her body limp yet burning, but he gritted his teeth and forced her under the bed frame, covering her with a blanket thrown carelessly to look natural. The knock came at the door, loud, sharp. His blood froze. "Human," a voice barked in the alien tongue, one he had grown used to over months. "Open, now." David forced himself to breathe, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He stepped to the door, heart pounding so hard it echoed in his ears. He unlatched it slowly and opened it just enough to see the tall figure of a guard, spear gleaming in his hand, glowing eyes scanning the room behind David. Another stood close by, his shadow stretching into the hut. "What do you want?" David asked, keeping his voice calm, though his chest was tight with fear. "Kaylee is missing," the guard said coldly. "She has not returned to her quarters. She was last seen near this part of the village. Did you see her?" David felt the heat from under the bed, even without looking. He shook his head. "No, I've been here all night." The second guard narrowed his eyes, leaning closer, sniffing the air as if he could sense something hidden. "Strange," he muttered. "The scent is strong." His gaze slid past David, scanning the shadows inside the hut. David stepped forward quickly, blocking his view. "I live alone. I don't know where she is. Maybe you should check the forest edge. She hunts there sometimes." His voice was steady, but his palms were damp. Every word felt like walking on thin ice. The guards exchanged a look. One grunted, unimpressed. "If you see her, report at once. She is dangerous now." The spear tapped against the ground like a warning. Then, after one last suspicious glance, they turned and left, their footsteps fading into the night. David closed the door slowly, his legs nearly giving out as he leaned against it. His chest rose and fell hard, sweat dripping down his back. He turned quickly and dropped to his knees, lifting the edge of the blanket. Kaylee's glowing eyes stared back at him from the dark space under the bed. They were wide, frightened, like a cornered animal, but also filled with something else: trust. She trusted him not to give her up. He reached his hand toward her. She hesitated, then clutched it tight, crawling weakly back into the open. Her breathing was fast, and her whole body shook, but her grip on his hand was iron. "You lied for me," she whispered, voice trembling. David didn't know what to say. He only nodded, helping her back onto the bed. She collapsed against the pillow, exhausted, but her eyes never left him. "Why?" she asked, barely audible. The answer came without thought. "Because you needed me." For a long moment, silence filled the room. The fire outside the village walls crackled faintly, and the guards' voices faded into the distance. David sat beside her, still gripping her hand, and realized the danger wasn't gone. This was only the beginning. He had made his choice: to protect her, to hide her, even against her own people. Kaylee's breathing slowed slightly, her body relaxing under his presence. But as her eyes closed, her nails still pressed lightly into his skin, holding on as if letting go meant she would be lost forever. David stared at her face, her glowing marks pulsing gently in rhythm with her heartbeat, and he knew the elder had been right. This was no game. He was standing at the edge of something far greater than he could imagine. And now, there was no turning back. David's hands shook as he held the edge of the blanket, his ears still ringing from the sound of the guards at his door. The silence after they left felt heavier than their presence. He sat back, breathing hard, staring at Kaylee as she crawled out from beneath the bed. Her body looked weak, but her glowing lines burned brighter in the darkness, as though her fever was alive and angry. She collapsed onto the bed again, clutching her own arms as if she wanted to tear the heat out of her skin. David moved closer, lowering himself to sit beside her. For a while, he said nothing, just listened to the shallow rhythm of her breath. His thoughts twisted with fear. Fear of the guards returning, fear of what Kaylee might do if she lost control, fear of what it meant to have chosen to protect her. Yet none of those fears were enough to make him push her away. She was here, trembling, and she trusted him now. That meant more than he could explain, even to himself. Her voice came suddenly, breaking the silence. "You risked your life." Her eyes were half closed, glowing faintly. She didn't sound proud or angry, just confused. David met her gaze. "I couldn't let them take you. You should have." Her voice cracked. "You don't understand what I am right now. If they find me here, they'll kill you. If I lose control, I could..." She bit her lip hard, stopping the words, but her nails dug into the mattress, ripping the fabric slightly. David leaned forward. "You're not alone in this. Let me help you." Her eyes widened a little, then softened, but her head shook slowly. "No one helps. No one can." She turned her face away as if ashamed. Her hair fell like a curtain, hiding her expression. David wanted to argue, but before he could speak, a sudden noise came from outside again. Shouts, distant but sharp. The guards were calling to each other. Kaylee flinched at the sound, her glowing lines flickering faster, brighter, as though fear made the fever worse. "Stay quiet," David whispered quickly, moving to the window. He lifted a corner of the cloth covering it and peered through. 2 guards were walking past, carrying torches that lit the ground in orange flames. They were scanning the huts, their voices firm, searching for her. David's heart pounded. If they chose to search his home again, he would not be able to lie twice. He turned back. Kaylee had pulled herself into a sitting position, her shoulders shaking as she whispered in her own language. Her words sounded like prayers, broken and desperate. Sweat glistened on her skin, and the glow under her flesh throbbed with each rapid beat of her heart. David moved closer again. "Lie down. I'll make it look like you're not here." Her eyes snapped to him, wild for a moment. "You're risking everything. Why? Why not throw me to them?" David stared at her, and for the first time, he spoke with complete honesty, his voice steady. Because you're not a monster. You're someone who needs help, and I don't abandon people." Her lips parted, but she said nothing. She simply looked at him, the fire in her eyes dimming for a heartbeat. Then she obeyed, lying back as her body trembled. David grabbed the blanket and covered her, tucking it close so only her glowing face peeked out from the shadows. He sat beside her again, placing one hand over her arm gently. Her skin burned, but he didn't move it away. Slowly, her breathing calmed, her nails loosening their grip on the mattress. Minutes passed, and the shouts outside faded. The guards moved on. The silence returned, heavier but safer. David finally let out a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Kaylee stirred again, opening her eyes slowly. "You should fear me," she whispered. "I do," David admitted, "but fear doesn't mean I'll run." She blinked, surprised, then laughed softly, though it was weak and bitter. "Humans are strange." The laugh turned into a cough, her whole body shaking. David steadied her with both hands, holding her shoulders until the fit passed. She leaned against him, her forehead pressing against his chest. He froze at first, his body stiff, but then he relaxed, letting her rest there. He could feel the heat radiating through his shirt, but he held her anyway. "You don't understand," she murmured, her voice muffled against him. This season will not end quickly. It will only get worse. If you stay near me, I will drag you down. I will destroy you." David shook his head. "Then let me fight it with you." She lifted her face slowly, her glowing eyes searching his. For a long time, she just stared, as if trying to see the truth in his words. Then her strength faltered, and she slumped against him again. The hours crept by. David sat with her in silence, listening to every sound outside, ready to protect her if the guards returned. Kaylee's breathing grew steadier, but her grip on his shirt never loosened, even in sleep. He stayed awake, watching the door, listening to the faint hum of the village beyond. As the night stretched on, David realized something that made his chest tighten. He wasn't just protecting her out of duty or fear of what would happen if she was caught. Somewhere in the middle of the danger and heat, he wanted her safe because he couldn't stand to see her broken. He didn't know what that meant or what would come next, but the truth was clear. He had crossed a line. The elder's warning echoed again in his mind, but this time it didn't sound like fear. It sounded like destiny. The nights after that were never the same. Every time darkness fell over the village, David locked his door carefully, sliding the bolt in place, checking it twice. Yet somehow, by the time midnight came, Kaylee would be inside. He never saw how she entered. Sometimes the door creaked open as if the bolt had been moved by unseen hands. Other times, he found the window pushed slightly aside, even though he was sure he had shut it. The marks on the wooden frame proved it. Scratches, long and sharp, like claws had scraped against it. She always found a way. At first, David thought it was only desperation that drove her. But the more nights she came, the more he noticed something different. She fought herself every time. She would stand in the shadows of his room, her chest rising and falling fast, her hands shaking as though she was restraining them from reaching for him. Her glowing lines burned brighter each night, pulsing in rhythm with her quickening breath. She never said much, only whispered fragments, his name, a warning to herself, or sometimes nothing at all. Yet she kept coming back. David tried to confront her one evening. She sat on his bed, clutching the edge of the blanket in her fists, her nails threatening to tear through the fabric. He stood before her, his arms crossed. "Why do you come here, Kaylee? You know it's dangerous, for both of us." Her head lifted slowly, her glowing eyes locking onto his. There was no hatred in them now, only exhaustion. Her lips parted, and her voice came out quiet but certain. "Because you don't see me as an animal." The words silenced him. He remembered the way the others in the tribe had spoken about her during this season, whispering with fear, calling her dangerous, cursed, untouchable. Even the guards searched for her like they hunted a beast. But she had chosen him, the outsider, the one considered weak by their standards. She came to him because he looked at her and saw more than what her people saw. Her breathing grew heavier, and she lowered her head again. "They would chain me if they knew. They would call me unclean." Her hands trembled. "But when you look at me, you see Kaylee." David stepped closer, kneeling beside the bed so his eyes met hers. "I see someone strong, someone who is fighting more than anyone else knows." Her lips quivered, her eyes shining not just with the glow of her skin, but with something deeper, something fragile. For the first time, she looked like she might cry, but no tears came. Instead, she let out a shaky laugh, bitter and soft. Strange human, you speak like no one here. That night, she didn't collapse in pain like before. Instead, she sat beside him for hours, her body trembling but calmer, as if his words had given her strength. Still, the heat inside her didn't fade. Sometimes she clutched her chest, sometimes his arm, searching for steadiness. He let her, even when her nails dug into his skin and left red marks. Days passed, and whispers spread through the village. People noticed Kaylee's absence from her quarters at night. Some said they had seen her shadow moving toward the outer huts. David felt eyes on him more often, suspicion curling like smoke around his every step. The villagers spoke in low voices when he walked past, some with scorn, some with open hostility. He tried to ignore them, but the pressure grew heavier each day. One evening, as he returned from the fields, two young warriors blocked his path. Their tall forms loomed over him, their glowing eyes filled with contempt. One spat on the ground near his feet. "Stay in your hut, human. Do not wander where you don't belong." David clenched his fists, but said nothing. He kept walking, though their laughter followed him like knives in his back. He knew what they suspected, but he could not stop Kaylee from coming. She came because she trusted him, and he couldn't betray that trust. That night, she returned again, weaker than before. Her body swayed as she entered, her knees almost buckling. David rushed forward, catching her before she fell. He guided her to the bed, laying her down gently. Her breathing was shallow, her glowing marks flickering like fading flames. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered, brushing the hair from her face. Her hand shot up, gripping his wrist with surprising strength despite her weakness. "I had to," she breathed. "I can't fight it alone." Her words pierced him deeper than the elder's warnings ever could. He sat beside her, letting her hold his hand, feeling the heat of her fever seep into his skin. He knew she wasn't lying. She was fighting something impossible, something that might kill her if she was left alone. And yet, she chose him. The night dragged on, and as her breathing steadied in sleep, David sat awake, staring at the door he had locked once more. He knew it no longer mattered whether he locked it or not. She would always find a way in, not because of instinct alone, but because she wanted to be there, with him. When dawn broke, he looked at her sleeping form and felt the weight of the truth settle on his chest. The tribe would never accept this. If they discovered she had chosen the human outsider as her refuge, they would turn on them both. Yet, as he watched her clutch the blanket like a child holding on to safety, he knew something else. No matter the danger, he could not turn her away. The elder's warning echoed again in his memory, but this time it sounded weaker, drowned out by her whispered words. "You don't see me as an animal." And he realized, with a strange certainty, that he never would. The village air grew heavier with suspicion as the days went by. David felt it every time he stepped outside. Conversations stopped when he walked past. Eyes followed him, narrow and sharp, as though everyone was waiting for him to make a mistake. The whispers grew louder, about Kaylee, about her nightly absences, about the strange scent that lingered in the wind near his hut. He tried to ignore it, but the weight pressed on him constantly. One night, the tension broke. Kaylee arrived later than usual, her steps unsteady, her breathing harsh. When she entered, she did not pause at the doorway like before. She moved with urgency, her glowing lines burning brighter than ever, her skin shimmering like fire under her flesh. David stood quickly, alarm spreading through him. "Kaylee?" he whispered. "What's wrong?" She did not answer. Her eyes locked onto him, wild and desperate. Before he could move, she closed the distance between them and shoved him against the wall with surprising force. The impact stole his breath. Her hands pressed into his shoulders, her nails sharp against his skin. She trembled all over, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her glowing eyes filled with something that was not entirely hers. David's heart thundered. The elder's warning echoed in his head. She would lose control. She would not think, only act. For the first time, he felt the truth of it in her touch. She was strong enough to break him, stronger than he could resist if she truly lost herself. Her breathing grew ragged, her face inches from his. "I can't stop it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It's too strong." David forced himself to stay calm, though every part of him wanted to panic. Slowly, carefully, he lifted his hands and placed them on her face. Her skin burned like hot stone, but he held on. "Kaylee," he said firmly, his voice steady. "Look at me. You're not lost. You're here, with me." For a moment, she resisted, her nails pressing deeper into his shoulders. He winced at the pain, but didn't let go. He held her gaze, his thumbs brushing her cheeks lightly, anchoring her. "You are Kaylee," he said again, louder this time. "Not this. Not the fever. Kaylee." Her glowing eyes flickered, confusion breaking through the wildness. Her grip loosened slightly. Her lips trembled, and she let out a sound caught between a growl and a sob. Her body shook violently, and then, suddenly, she collapsed forward, burying her face against his chest. David caught her, wrapping his arms around her as she trembled. She clutched him tightly, her whole body shaking as though fighting a war inside herself. For the first time, her strength felt fragile. He held her close, speaking softly into her hair. "You're stronger than this. You can fight it. I'm here. I won't let you go." And then it happened. Kaylee broke. The proud warrior, the defiant daughter of her people, the fierce woman who never bowed her head. She cried. Silent tears slipped onto his shirt as her body shook. She clung to him, not as someone powerful, but as someone desperate for comfort. David closed his eyes, holding her tighter. He knew what this meant. If the tribe saw her like this, they would not forgive. To them, this was weakness, shame, something to be hidden or punished. But to him, it was something else entirely. It was the truth of who she was beneath the fire. Time blurred. David sat on the edge of the bed, Kaylee curled against him, her tears slowing as exhaustion pulled her down. She finally slept, her grip still clutching his shirt as though afraid he would vanish. He did not move, afraid that letting go would undo everything. He stayed awake through the night, listening to her breathing, feeling the warmth of her body against his. But outside, the whispers did not fade. The tribe had begun to gather in secret, their suspicions growing too strong to ignore. Some had already accused him openly of keeping Kaylee in his hut. Others demanded he be cast out before he brought shame to them all. The next morning, David stepped outside to draw water, and the air felt different, colder, sharper. A group of warriors stood near the well, their glowing eyes watching him with open hatred. One of them stepped forward, his voice loud enough for everyone around to hear. "She goes to you, doesn't she, human? You think you can hide it, but we know. Her scent is all over you." The crowd murmured. David's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He turned back toward his hut, ignoring them, but their laughter and taunts followed him like arrows. That night, Kaylee returned again, and this time she looked broken before she even crossed the threshold. "They know," she whispered, her voice shaking. "The tribe knows." David felt his stomach drop, but he forced calm into his voice. "Let them talk. We'll find a way." Kaylee shook her head, her eyes glistening. "You don't understand. If they prove it, they will kill you." David stepped forward, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Then we'll make sure they don't. Whatever happens, I'm not letting you face this alone." Her lips parted, her expression filled with both fear and something else, something softer. She lifted a hand, touching his cheek gently, her claw-like nails careful not to hurt him. "You should run. You should save yourself." He shook his head without hesitation. Not a chance. She stared at him for a long moment, her glowing eyes searching his face as though trying to understand why he would stay. Then she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. Her breath was warm, uneven. "Strange human," she whispered again, her voice soft, almost fond. And in that moment, David knew something had shifted. The heat, the danger, the fear, they were still there, but underneath it all was a bond forming between them, stronger than either of them had expected. Something the tribe could never understand. The night stretched on, and as Kaylee finally slept in his arms once more, David realized the truth. The danger was no longer only about her fever. The real danger was the tribe itself. They would not forgive. They would not forget. And soon, they would come for them both. The night of judgment came faster than David expected. The whispers had turned into open accusations. By the time the sun set and the moons rose, a crowd had gathered in the center of the village, their glowing eyes fixed on his hut like predators circling prey. David stood inside with Kaylee, listening to the distant voices chanting his name with scorn. His chest tightened as he looked at her. She was pale from exhaustion, her glowing lines pulsing weakly, yet her eyes were clear, steady. "They will not let this pass," she said quietly. Her voice carried no fear, only certainty. David clenched his fists. "Then let them come. I won't give you up." Before Kaylee could answer, the sound of wood striking echoed outside, spears hitting the ground in unison. A deep voice shouted, "Bring out the human!" The command was sharp, heavy with authority. It was the tribe's commander. Kaylee's hand gripped David's arm tightly. "If you go out, they'll demand your death." David looked at her, meeting her glowing eyes. "If I don't, they'll tear this hut apart. I won't let them drag you out like a criminal." Before she could stop him, he stepped toward the door. The crowd roared the moment he appeared, their glowing faces lit by torchlight, their voices full of hatred. "Outsider! Weakling! He has dishonored us!" Spears pounded against the ground in rhythm, shaking the dirt beneath his feet. David stood tall, though fear coiled in his stomach. "I have done nothing but protect her," he shouted, his voice strong. "She is not a beast. She is not something to be chained. She is Kaylee." His words only fueled the anger of the crowd. Warriors pushed forward, their spears raised. But before they could reach him, Kaylee stepped out of the hut. The moment she appeared, the noise faltered. Her glowing lines blazed bright, her eyes sharp and fierce despite her weakness. She stood beside David, her head held high. "I chose him," she declared, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. "No one forced me. No one tricked me. In my heat, I could have gone to any, but I went to him. By our law, my choice cannot be denied." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The commander's face hardened. "You shame us, Kaylee. A human is not worthy of you." Kaylee lifted her chin higher. "Then punish me if you must. But the law is clear. When one in heat chooses, that bond is sacred. You cannot break it, even if the chosen is human." The tribe erupted into chaos, voices shouting in anger, some in disbelief. Warriors argued with each other. Elders muttered about ancient laws, but none could deny what she had said. The tradition was older than any of them, written in stone long before humans had ever walked among them. The commander's jaw tightened. His spear slammed into the ground. "Then so be it. The human is bound to you. Let all see the shame of it. Let all witness the weakness of our bloodline." Kaylee turned to David, her glowing eyes softening for the first time in front of her people. She reached out and took his hand in hers. The crowd shouted again, some in fury, some in shock, but none dared move against the ancient law. Their bond was sealed. David felt his breath catch as he looked at her. Only hours ago, he had feared for his life. Now, by a twist of fate and tradition, he was tied to her forever. His heart raced, not from fear now, but from something deeper, something that made his chest tighten when her hand gripped his. The crowd slowly dispersed, though their eyes still burned with anger and suspicion. Whispers followed them like shadows, but no one dared challenge the law openly. When the torches faded and the voices grew distant, only silence remained in the village square. David and Kaylee stood together, her hand still in his. He could feel her trembling, but her gaze remained steady. "You are mine now," she said softly, but there was no pride in her voice. Only relief, only truth. David smiled faintly, though his heart was still heavy. "And you're mine." They walked back into the hut together. The night outside was restless with whispers and hate, but inside there was a strange peace. Kaylee sat on the bed, her glowing marks dimming as exhaustion took her. David sat beside her, watching as her breathing slowed. "You risked everything," she murmured, her eyes closing. "So did you," he replied gently. "Now we face it together." Her lips curved into the faintest smile before sleep claimed her. David stayed awake beside her, staring at the flickering shadows on the walls. He thought of the elder's warning, of the danger he had walked into by forgetting to lock his door. Yet as he looked at Kaylee, resting peacefully for the first time in days, he knew he would not change a single choice he had made. The future was uncertain. The tribe might never accept him. Enemies might come from within and outside. But one truth stood stronger than all of it. Kaylee had chosen him. And by their law, by her voice, by her heart, he belonged to her, and she to him. As the moons drifted across the sky and the night grew quiet, David finally lay down beside her. For the first time since the warnings began, he felt no fear. He closed his eyes, knowing the path ahead would be hard, but not impossible. He had faced death before, But now he faced life bound to Kaylee, life tied to a choice that could not be undone. And deep inside, he knew the elder had been wrong. Forgetting to lock the door had not been his mistake. It had been the beginning of everything.